Just sign this and don't ask questions." Those were the words my daughter-in-law spoke as she slid papers across my kitchen table. I almost signed them, but the action I took instead left my son and his wife facing criminal charges. I'm glad to have you here. Follow my story until the end and comment the city you're watching from so I can see how far my story has reached. I never thought my own son would turn against me. At 70 years old, I thought I'd seen every kind of betrayal this world could offer. I'd buried a husband, raised 2 children alone after he passed, and survived more hardships than most people face in a lifetime. But standing in my own kitchen on that cold November morning, watching my daughter-in-law Vanessa tap her perfectly manicured nails on a stack of legal documents, I realized I was wrong about how well I knew the people closest to me. My name is Dorothy Whitmore, and I've lived in the same modest 2-story house in Riverside, Oregon for 43 years. My late husband Gerald and I bought this place back in 1982, when the neighborhood was still being developed and you could buy a decent home on a factory worker's salary. Gerald worked at the lumber mill for 30 years before lung disease took him from me in 2010. Those were hard years after he died, learning to live alone, managing on my pension and his life insurance, watching my children build their own lives while I figured out how to exist in a house that suddenly felt too big and too empty. But I'd made peace with my life. I had my garden where I grew tomatoes and green beans every summer. I had my Tuesday book club at the Riverside Public Library. I had my Wednesday morning volunteer shift at the food bank. I had my friend Constance who lived 3 houses down and would come over for coffee and gossip about the neighborhood. My life was quiet, predictable, and mine. Until that November morning when everything changed. It started the week before, actually, though I didn't recognize the warning signs at the time. My son Marcus had called on a Sunday evening, which was unusual because he typically only called on my birthday and major holidays. Marcus was my youngest, 47 years old, and worked as a regional sales manager for a medical supply company. He'd always been the ambitious one, the child who wanted more than what Riverside could offer, who'd moved to Portland right after college and married Vanessa, a woman who came from money and seemed to view our small town as something quaint and slightly embarrassing. "Mom, how are you feeling?" Marcus had asked, his voice carrying that careful tone people use when they're about to ask for something. "I'm fine, sweetheart. Same as always. How are Vanessa and the kids?" "Everyone's good. Listen, Mom, Vanessa and I have been talking, and we're concerned about you living alone in that big house." I'd felt a small flutter of unease in my chest. "Marcus, I've been living alone in this house for 15 years. Why the sudden concern?" "It's not sudden, Mom. We've been worried for a while. You're 70 now. What if you fall? What if you have a medical emergency and no one's there to help?" "I have my medical alert bracelet," I'd reminded him. "And Constance checks on me every day." "Constance is 74 years old, Mom. She can barely take care of herself." The dismissive way he said it had bothered me. Constance was sharper than people half her age, still drove, still volunteered at the animal shelter, still hosted her grandchildren every other weekend. But I'd let it pass. "What exactly are you suggesting, Marcus?" "We're not suggesting anything yet. We just want to come visit this week and talk about some options. Maybe Tuesday or Wednesday." "Wednesday works," I'd said, already feeling the familiar guilt that came from knowing I was being a burden to my successful son and his sophisticated wife. That conversation should have been my first warning. But when you're a mother, you want to believe your children have your best interests at heart. You want to trust that the baby you rocked to sleep, the toddler whose skin knees you bandaged, the teenager whose heart you helped mend after his first breakup, you want to believe that person would never deliberately hurt you. So when Wednesday morning arrived and I heard Marcus's BMW pull into my driveway at exactly 9 o'clock, I'd actually been looking forward to seeing them. I'd made coffee in my old percolator, the one Gerald had bought me for our 10th anniversary. I'd put out some of the lemon cookies I'd baked the day before. I'd even tidied up the living room, though it was always tidy. Living alone means there's rarely any mess to clean. Vanessa had come through the door first, bringing with her a cloud of expensive perfume that seemed to fill my small kitchen. She was 52 but looked 40, thanks to what I suspected were regular visits to cosmetic doctors in Portland. Her blonde hair was cut in a sleek bob that probably cost more than I spent on groceries in a month. She wore a charcoal gray pantsuit with a silk blouse underneath, and her jewelry, a gold watch, diamond earrings, a tennis bracelet, caught the morning light streaming through my kitchen window. Marcus followed behind her, carrying a leather briefcase that looked new and expensive. My son had inherited his father's height and broad shoulders, but where Gerald had carried himself with workingman's humility, Marcus had developed an air of corporate confidence that sometimes made him seem like a stranger to me. "Hi, Mom," he'd said, giving me a brief hug that felt more obligatory than affectionate. "You look good." "You too, sweetheart. Both of you. Can I get you some coffee? I made those lemon cookies you used to love." "We can't stay long," Vanessa had said immediately, glancing at her watch. "We have an appointment in Portland at 11. "Oh." I'd felt the small sting of disappointment. "Well, what did you want to talk about?" That's when Vanessa had pulled the stack of papers from Marcus's briefcase and set them on my kitchen table with a soft thud that seemed to echo in the suddenly tense silence. "We've been doing some research, Margaret," Vanessa had said, using my first name in that familiar way she had, even though she'd never asked permission to call me anything other than Mom or Mrs. Whitmore. "And we've discovered that you're sitting on a substantial asset without any protection." "Asset?" I'd pulled out a chair and sat down, feeling suddenly off balance. "Your house, Mom," Marcus had explained, sliding into the chair across from me while Vanessa remained standing, looming over us both. "It's worth at least $400,000 in the current market." The number had shocked me. Gerald and I had paid $78,000 for this house back in 1982. I'd known property values had gone up over the years, but $400,000 seemed impossible. That's wonderful, I suppose," I'd said slowly. "Though I'm not planning to sell." "That's exactly the problem," Vanessa had jumped in. "You're not planning to sell, which means all that equity is just sitting here, vulnerable." "Vulnerable to what?" "To everything, Mom," Marcus had said, and I'd noticed he wouldn't quite meet my eyes. "Medical bills, long-term care costs, estate taxes. Do you know what a nursing home costs these days? Anywhere from $5,000 to $10,000 a month. Your pension and Social Security wouldn't cover a fraction of that. I'm not planning on going into a nursing home." "Nobody plans on it," Vanessa had said with a thin smile. "But what happens if you have a stroke? What happens if you develop dementia? What happens if you fall and break your hip and can't live independently anymore?" The scenarios had tumbled out of her mouth like bullets, each one hitting a different fear I'd tried not to think about. Getting old, losing my mind, becoming a burden, dying alone and helpless. "If that happens," Vanessa had continued, her voice taking on a rehearsed quality that suggested she'd practiced this speech, "the state will put a lien on your house to pay for your care. After you're gone, they'll sell it to recover the costs. Everything Gerald worked for, everything you've built here, it'll go to the government instead of to your family." "Is that true, Marcus?" I'd asked my son, searching his face for honesty. "It can happen, Mom. Medicaid recovery is a real thing. But there are ways to protect against it," Vanessa had said quickly, sliding the papers closer to me. "That's why we've had our attorney draw up these documents. They'll transfer ownership of your house into a family trust. You'll still live here, nothing about your daily life changes, but legally the house won't be in your name anymore. Which means it's protected from creditors, from the state, from anyone who might try to take it." I'd stared down at the papers, trying to make sense of the dense legal language. "And who would own the house if not me?" "The Whitmore Family Trust," Marcus had said. "Which Vanessa and I would manage as co-trustees. Along with a few other assets we'd fold into the trust for estate planning purposes." "What other assets?" "Your bank accounts, your investment accounts, anything with substantial value that needs protection." My mouth had gone dry. "You want me to sign over everything I own?" "We want to help you protect everything you own," Vanessa had corrected, her smile never wavering. "This is what smart people do, Margaret. This is how wealthy families preserve their legacies for future generations." "But I wasn't a wealthy family." I was a widow living on a fixed income in a house that had somehow become worth an impossible amount of money. I'd like some time to think about this, I'd said carefully. There isn't much time, Marcus had said, and for the first time I'd heard an edge in his voice. The legal work is already done. Our attorney has already filed the preliminary paperwork. We need your signature today to complete the process before the end of the fiscal year. Why before the end of the year? Tax purposes, Vanessa had said dismissively. It's complicated. The important thing is that we need to act now, or we'll have to start the whole process over again in January, which means more legal fees, more complications. How much did this legal work cost? I'd asked. That's not important, Marcus had said quickly. We've invested $5,000 in protecting your assets, Vanessa had said, shooting Marcus a look. Which we're happy to do because we love you and want to make sure you're taken care of. But obviously we can't afford to pay for this twice if you let the paperwork expire. $5,000. The amount had made my head spin. That was more than I spent in 6 months. I appreciate that you've done this, I'd said slowly, but I don't understand why you didn't talk to me before spending that kind of money. I never asked you to, you wouldn't have asked, Marcus had interrupted. That's the problem, Mom. You're too proud to ask for help, even when you desperately need it. I don't desperately need help. You're 70 years old, living alone in a house you can barely maintain, Vanessa had said, her patience clearly wearing thin. Your roof is leaking, we saw the water stain in the upstairs bathroom last time we visited. Your furnace is from 1995. Your property taxes go up every year. How long do you think you can keep this up? Each statement had felt like an accusation, a catalogue of my failures and inadequacies. The house is fine, I'd said quietly. I'm managing. For now, Marcus had said. But what about next year? What about 5 years from now? Mom, we're trying to think ahead here. We're trying to make sure you don't lose everything. I'd looked down at the papers again, at the little flags marking where I was supposed to sign. There were so many of them. Page after page of legal language I didn't understand, all leading to those little flags. Sign here. Initial here. Date here. I'd like to have my own lawyer review these documents, I'd said, surprising myself with the steadiness of my voice. The temperature in the room had dropped 20 degrees. Your own lawyer? Vanessa's voice had gone sharp. Margaret, do you have any idea how much lawyers charge? You'd be looking at hundreds of dollars an hour just to have someone tell you exactly what our attorney already explained. Then I suppose I'll have to pay for it, I'd said, meeting her eyes. With what money? Vanessa had asked bluntly. You're living on what, $2,000 a month from Social Security and Gerald's pension? You can't afford to waste money on unnecessary legal fees. How I spend my money is my business. Actually, that's exactly what we're trying to help you understand, Marcus had said, his voice taking on a patronizing tone I'd never heard from him before. The way you manage your finances, it's not sustainable. You clip coupons and shop at thrift stores and act like you're still living in 1985. The world has changed, Mom. You need professional help managing your assets. I don't have assets to manage. I have a house and enough money to live on. That's all I need. That's all you think you need, Vanessa had said, because you don't understand the bigger picture. Do you know what happens to elderly people who don't plan properly? They end up in state-run facilities, sharing rooms with strangers, eating institutional food, being cared for by underpaid workers who don't give a damn about them. Is that what you want? The image she'd painted had been deliberately cruel, designed to frighten me into compliance. What I want, I'd said, feeling anger begin to rise through my fear, is to understand what I'm signing before I sign it. That seems reasonable to me. It would be reasonable if we had unlimited time, Marcus had said, standing up abruptly. But we don't. These documents need to be filed by Friday, or the whole trust structure falls apart and we have to start over. Then I guess you'll have to start over. The words had come out more firmly than I'd intended, and I'd watched my son's face flush with frustration. Mom, why are you being so difficult about this? I'm not being difficult. I'm being careful. You're being paranoid, Vanessa had snapped, abandoning all pretense of patience. You're treating us like we're trying to rob you when all we're doing is trying to protect you from your own poor judgment. Vanessa, Marcus had started, but she'd cut him off. No, Marcus, she needs to hear this. Margaret, I'm going to be very blunt with you. You're an elderly woman living alone with no real understanding of modern finance or estate planning. You're vulnerable, whether you want to admit it or not. We're offering you a solution that will protect you and your assets, and you're throwing it back in our faces because of some misguided sense of independence. I'd stood up then, my hands shaking but my voice steady. I think you should leave. Fine, Vanessa had said, snatching the papers off the table. We'll leave. But don't come crying to us when you lose everything because you were too stubborn to accept help. I won't. Marcus had looked at me with an expression I couldn't quite read, disappointment mixed with something darker. You're making a mistake, Mom. A big one. Maybe I am, I'd said. But it's my mistake to make. They'd left in a fury of slammed doors and squealing tires. I'd stood in my kitchen, listening to the silence they'd left behind, and felt my hands trembling. The encounter had shaken me more than I wanted to admit. But as I'd looked down at the business card Vanessa had left on the counter, some attorney named Bradley Finch from a firm in Portland I'd never heard of, I'd felt my late husband's voice in my head as clearly as if he were standing beside me. Dorothy, if it feels wrong, it is wrong. Trust your gut. Gerald had always said that. 23 years of marriage had taught me to listen when that quiet voice in my head started whispering warnings. I'd picked up my phone with shaking hands and dialed the number for Reynolds and Associates, the law firm that had handled Gerald's estate when he'd passed away. I didn't know if they'd even remember me. It had been 15 years, but I had to start somewhere. Reynolds and Associates, this is Jennifer speaking. How may I help you? The voice on the other end had been young and cheerful, completely at odds with my emotional state. Hello, my name is Dorothy Whitmore. Your firm handled my late husband's estate back in 2010, and I need legal advice. Of course, Mrs. Whitmore. What's the nature of the legal issue? My son wants me to sign some documents. Papers that would transfer my house and my bank accounts into a family trust. I don't know if I should sign them. There had been a pause on the other end of the line. When Jennifer spoke again, her voice had been more serious. Mrs. Whitmore, I'm going to connect you with Patricia Reynolds. She's our senior partner and she specializes in elder law and estate planning. Can you hold for just a moment? Yes, of course. The hold music had been some generic classical piece, but I'd barely heard it. My mind had been racing, replaying every moment of the conversation with Marcus and Vanessa, trying to understand when things had gone so wrong between us. When had my son started looking at me like I was incompetent? When had his wife started speaking to me like I was a burden? And why had they been so insistent that I sign those papers immediately, without taking time to understand them? Mrs. Whitmore? This is Patricia Reynolds. The voice that came on the line had been warm but professional, with a slight southern accent that reminded me of my own mother. Thank you for taking my call, I'd said. I'm sorry to bother you out of the blue like this. It's no bother at all. Jennifer mentioned you need some advice about estate planning documents. Yes. My son and daughter-in-law came by this morning with papers they want me to sign. They said it's to protect my house from being taken by the state if I need long-term care. But something about it feels wrong, and I'd trailed off, feeling foolish. How could I explain that maternal instinct that was screaming at me that something wasn't right? Tell me exactly what happened, Patricia had said gently. Start from the beginning and don't leave anything out. So I had. I'd told her about the Sunday phone call, about Marcus and Vanessa showing up with the papers already prepared, about their insistence that I sign immediately, about their anger when I'd asked to have my own lawyer review the documents. Patricia had listened without interrupting, and when I'd finished, she'd been quiet for a long moment. Mrs. Whitmore, I need to ask you some questions, and I want you to answer honestly. Has your son or daughter-in-law ever asked you for money? No, never. Marcus makes good money with his sales job, and Vanessa's family is quite wealthy. Have they ever offered to help you manage your finances before this? No. They've never shown any interest in my financial affairs until now. And this trust they want you to sign, did they explain exactly how it works? Who has control over the assets? What happens to the property after you pass away? They said they would manage it as co-trustees. That I'd still live in the house, but it wouldn't legally be in my name anymore. They said it was to protect it from Medicaid recovery. Did they mention anything about compensation for serving as trustees? I'd paused, trying to remember. No, they didn't mention that. Did they provide you with a copy of the trust documents to keep? No. Vanessa took all the papers with her when they left. Another pause. Then Patricia had said something that made my blood run cold. Mrs. Whitmore, I don't want to alarm you unnecessarily, but what you're describing has several red flags that concern me. The pressure to sign immediately without legal review, the lack of transparency about the trust terms, the emotional manipulation, these are tactics often used in elder financial exploitation cases. Exploitation? But it's my son. He wouldn't. I understand this is difficult to hear. And I'm not saying that's definitely what's happening. But I think you were very wise to call before signing anything. Would you be comfortable coming into our office so we can review this situation more thoroughly? Yes, I'd said without hesitation. Yes, I'd like that. Can you come this afternoon? Say 2 o'clock? I'll be there. After I'd hung up, I'd stood in my kitchen for a long moment, looking around at the home Gerald and I had built together. The wallpaper we'd hung in 1987, the countertops we'd saved up for and installed ourselves in 1995, the window over the sink where I'd stood countless times washing dishes and watching my children play in the backyard. This house held 43 years of memories. Birthday parties and Christmas mornings, homework sessions at the kitchen table, family dinners and quiet evenings. Gerald's last coherent words had been spoken in the bedroom upstairs. This wasn't just an asset to be managed or a number on a balance sheet. This was my life. And something in my gut told me that Marcus and Vanessa weren't trying to protect it. They were trying to take it. I'd looked at the clock. It was 10:30. I had 3.5 hours until my appointment with Patricia Reynolds. I decided to use that time to go through every piece of financial paperwork I had, bank statements, investment accounts, insurance policies, the deed to the house. If there was something my son and daughter-in-law were after, I needed to understand what it was before I walked into that lawyer's office. As I'd climbed the stairs to the spare bedroom where I kept my filing cabinet, I'd felt something I hadn't felt in the 15 years since Gerald died. I'd felt like I was preparing for a fight. And though I didn't know it yet, I was about to discover that the betrayal ran much deeper than I could have imagined. The papers they'd wanted me to sign were just the beginning. My son and daughter-in-law had been planning this for months, maybe years. And if I'd signed those documents that morning, would have lost everything. But I hadn't signed. And that decision, that one moment of doubt and caution, was about to unravel a scheme that would shock everyone who knew my family. The question that haunted me as I pulled out my filing cabinet and began sorting through years of accumulated paperwork was simple but devastating. How long had my own son been planning to rob me? And had there been other signs I'd missed because I'd been too trusting, too willing to see the best in the child I'd raised? I was about to find out. And what I discovered in those files would change everything. The 3.5 hours between my phone call with Patricia Reynolds and my appointment at her office felt like the longest of my life. I sat in my spare bedroom, the room that had once been Marcus's childhood sanctuary, filled with baseball posters and model airplanes, surrounded by filing boxes and manila folders, trying to piece together a puzzle I hadn't even known existed. My filing system wasn't sophisticated. Gerald had always handled the important paperwork when he was alive, keeping everything organized in labeled folders: insurance, property tax, investments, medical. After he died, I'd done my best to maintain his system, though I'll admit there were years where I just stuffed papers into folders without much thought, overwhelmed by the task of managing everything alone. Now, sitting on the hardwood floor with documents spread around me like fallen leaves, I wished I'd been more diligent. The deed to the house was exactly where it should be, in a folder labeled Property Documents. I pulled it out and read it carefully, though the legal language was dense and confusing. But the important parts were clear enough. The house was in my name alone. Gerald and I had owned it jointly until his death, at which point it had transferred entirely to me as the surviving spouse. No mortgages, no liens, no encumbrances. Just my name on a piece of paper that said I owned this 2-story home and the quarter-acre lot it sat on. $400,000, Marcus had said. I still couldn't wrap my mind around that number. I set the deed aside and pulled out my bank statements. I had 3 accounts at Riverside Community Bank, a checking account where my pension and Social Security were deposited each month, a savings account with about $18,000 that I'd been building up for emergencies, and a money market account with another $12,000 that earned slightly better interest. $30,000 in liquid savings. It had taken me 15 years to accumulate that much, living carefully, clipping coupons, shopping sales, driving my 2004 Toyota Camry until the wheels fell off. $30,000 felt like a fortune to me, a cushion against disaster, proof that I could take care of myself. But I knew it wouldn't last long if I had a serious medical emergency. Vanessa had been right about that much. Healthcare was expensive, and getting more expensive every year. I found my investment statements next, from an account I barely looked at anymore. Gerald had set it up 25 years ago, putting a little money aside each month into mutual funds. After he died, I'd stopped contributing to it, but I'd never touched the principal either. The latest statement showed a balance of $73,000. I stared at that number in shock. $73,000? The last time I'd really looked at this account, maybe 5 years ago, it had been worth 40-something thousand. How had it grown so much? Then I noticed the date on the statement, October 2024. Last month. And I realized I hadn't actually opened this statement, or any of the previous ones. They came in the mail every quarter, and I filed them away without reading them, the same way I'd filed away so many other things that reminded me of Gerald and the life we'd planned together. $73,000 in investments. $30,000 in savings. A house worth $400,000. I added it up in my head and felt dizzy. I wasn't rich by any means, but I was worth over $500,000. A woman who shopped at thrift stores and heated only the rooms she was using to save on the electric bill was sitting on $500,000 in assets. No wonder Marcus and Vanessa wanted me to sign those papers. But why the urgency? Why the pressure to sign immediately without legal review? If they were genuinely trying to protect these assets for my benefit, wouldn't they want me to understand exactly what I was signing? I looked at the clock. It was nearly 1 o'clock. I needed to get ready for my appointment with Patricia Reynolds. But first, I wanted to check one more thing. I went back through my bank statements, this time looking more carefully at the transaction history. Most of it was exactly what I expected: pension deposits, Social Security deposits, automatic payments for utilities and insurance, occasional withdrawals for groceries and gas. Nothing unusual. But then I noticed something odd. 3 months ago, in August, there had been a withdrawal for $500 with a note that said, "Account transfer, Whitmore Family Medical Fund." I frowned. I hadn't authorized any transfer to a medical fund. I didn't even know what that was. I went back through older statements and found 2 more similar withdrawals, $500 in July, $500 in June. $1,500 total, transferred to something called the Whitmore Family Medical Fund without my knowledge or authorization. My hand started shaking as I pulled out my checkbook register. I still kept a physical register, writing down every check I wrote and every ATM withdrawal I made, the old-fashioned way. I flipped back through the pages to June, July, and August. No checks written for $500. No ATM withdrawals matching those amounts. These transfers hadn't been made by me. Someone else had access to my account. I felt sick to my stomach. I grabbed my phone and called Riverside Community Bank, my fingers fumbling on the keypad. Riverside Community Bank, this is Trevor speaking. How can I help you today? This is Dorothy Whitmore. I have a checking account with you, and I'm seeing some transactions on my statement that I didn't authorize. I'd be happy to help you with that, Mrs. Whitmore. Can I have your account number? I read him the number from my statement, then waited while he pulled up my account. Okay, I have your account here. What transactions are you concerned about? There are 3 withdrawals, $500 each, in June, July, and August. They're labeled as transfers to something called the Whitmore Family Medical Fund. I didn't make those transfers. Let me check on that for you. I heard typing in the background. Okay, I'm seeing those transactions. They were initiated through online banking using the secondary account holder's credentials. My heart stopped. Secondary account holder? What secondary account holder? More typing. It looks like Marcus Whitmore was added as a joint account holder on this account in April of this year. The room seemed to tilt around me. I never added him to my account. According to our records, the change was made in person at our Riverside branch on April 15th. Both signatures are on file, yours and Mr. Whitmore's. That's impossible. I never went to the bank in April to add anyone to my account. There was a pause on the other end of the line. Mrs. Whitmore, are you saying you didn't authorize this change? I'm saying I never made this change. I never signed anything adding my son to my bank account. I see. Trevor's voice had become more serious. Mrs. Whitmore, if you're alleging that unauthorized changes were made to your account, I need to transfer you to our fraud department. Can you hold, please? Yes. The hold music was jarring, some upbeat pop song that felt wildly inappropriate for what I was feeling. Marcus had added himself to my bank account without my knowledge. He'd been taking money out of my account for months. Was this why they wanted me to sign those trust documents? Were they planning to take everything? Mrs. Whitmore? This is Sandra Chen from our fraud investigation department. Trevor briefed me on your situation. I need to ask you some detailed questions about the account changes made in April. Is now a good time? I looked at the clock. It was 1:15. I had 45 minutes until my appointment with Patricia Reynolds, and the law office was a 20-minute drive from my house. I have an appointment at 2 o'clock, I said. Can we do this after? Or can I come into the branch? Given the nature of what you're reporting, I'd prefer to document this conversation now if possible. This won't take long, maybe 15 minutes? Okay. Yes. Let's do it now. For the next 20 minutes, Sandra asked me detailed questions. Had I given anyone permission to access my account? No. Had I received any documentation from the bank about account changes? Not that I remembered. Had I noticed any missing mail around that time? I thought back to April. That was when my neighbor's teenage grandson had been caught stealing mail from mailboxes in the neighborhood, before his grandmother made him return everything and apologize to everyone on the street. Actually, yes, I said slowly. We had a mail theft problem in April. A teenager was taking mail from mailboxes. I thought he'd just returned everything, but maybe. That could explain how someone got access to bank correspondence with your signature on it, Sandra said. Mrs. Whitmore, I'm going to put an immediate freeze on any transactions from the secondary account holder. I'm also going to flag your account for investigation. You'll need to come into the branch with identification to verify your identity and sign some fraud affidavits, but for now, no one except you will be able to access this account. Thank you, I said, my voice shaking. I also strongly recommend you check all of your other financial accounts, credit cards, investment accounts, anything with your name on it. If someone was able to add themselves to your bank account, they may have attempted to access other accounts as well. After I hung up, I sat in stunned silence. My son had forged my signature to gain access to my bank account. He'd been stealing from me, small amounts, probably hoping I wouldn't notice. And now he wanted me to sign papers giving him control over everything I owned. I looked at the clock. 1:40. I needed to leave for my appointment. I grabbed my purse and the folder containing all my financial documents, and headed for the door. My hands were still shaking as I started my car. The 20-minute drive to the Reynolds and Associates law office passed in a blur. I kept replaying conversations with Marcus in my head, searching for signs I'd missed, clues that should have told me something was wrong. When had he become this person? When had my son, the boy who used to hold my hand crossing the street, who'd cried on his first day of kindergarten, who'd brought me flowers every Mother's Day, when had he turned into someone who could steal from his own mother? Reynolds and Associates occupied a small brick building on Main Street in downtown Riverside, sandwiched between a coffee shop and an insurance agency. I'd walked past this building 100 times without really seeing it, never imagining I'd need their services for anything more than Gerald's estate settlement 15 years ago. The reception area was small but professionally decorated, with comfortable chairs and landscape paintings on the walls. A young woman sat at the desk, probably the Jennifer I'd spoken to on the phone that morning. "Mrs. Whitmore," she asked with a warm smile. "Ms. Reynolds is expecting you. Can I get you some water or coffee?" "Water would be nice, thank you." She disappeared down a hallway and returned a moment later with a bottle of water, then led me to a corner office with windows overlooking Main Street. Patricia Reynolds stood up from behind her desk as I entered. She was a tall woman in her early 60s, with steel gray hair cut short and intelligent eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. She wore a navy blue suit and sensible shoes, and something about her reminded me of the teachers I'd respected most when I was young, competent, no nonsense, but kind. "Mrs. Whitmore, please sit down." She gestured to a pair of comfortable chairs near the window rather than the more formal seats in front of her desk. "I appreciate you coming in on short notice. Thank you for seeing me so quickly." "Of course. Now, you mentioned on the phone that your son wants you to sign some estate planning documents. Why don't you walk me through exactly what happened, and then we'll discuss your options." So I told her everything. The Sunday phone call, the Wednesday morning ambush, the pressure to sign immediately, the anger when I'd refused. I told her about the trust documents I'd never been allowed to keep or review. I told her about Vanessa's warnings about nursing homes and Medicaid recovery. And then I told her what I'd discovered that afternoon, the unauthorized addition of Marcus to my bank account, the withdrawals to the mysterious Whitmore Family Medical Fund, the forged signature. Patricia listened without interrupting, taking notes on a legal pad. When I finished, she was quiet for a long moment, studying her notes. "Mrs. Whitmore, I'm going to be very direct with you because I think you deserve honesty. What you're describing is a textbook case of financial elder abuse, and it's likely been going on for longer than you realize." The words hit me like a physical blow, even though part of me had known this was coming. The unauthorized access to your bank account is bank fraud and identity theft. The forged signature is forgery. The pressure tactics and emotional manipulation are hallmarks of undue influence. And if those trust documents were written the way I suspect they were, signing them would have given your son and daughter-in-law complete legal control over all your assets while leaving you with no meaningful rights or protections. But why? The question came out as almost a whisper. Marcus makes good money. Vanessa's family is wealthy. Why would they need to steal from me? Patricia took off her glasses and rubbed her eyes. In my experience, this is rarely about actual financial need. It's about greed, about opportunity, about people convincing themselves they're entitled to assets they view as eventually theirs anyway. They tell themselves they're not really stealing because the money will be theirs when you die. They rationalize it as early inheritance or protecting family assets. "He's my son," I said, and I could hear my voice breaking. I raised him. I sacrificed for him. How could he do this to me? "I know this is incredibly painful," Patricia said gently. "But right now, we need to focus on protecting you and your assets. The emotional processing will come later, but first we need to make sure you're safe. What do I need to do?" She pulled out a fresh legal pad and started making a list. "First, we need to secure all of your accounts. You've already contacted your bank, which is good. But we need to check everything: investment accounts, insurance policies, credit cards, anything with your name on it. We need to make sure Marcus and Vanessa haven't gained access to anything else." How would they have gained access? Power of attorney documents can be surprisingly easy to forge. Medical authorization forms. Sometimes they claim to be calling on your behalf and use personal information to verify identity. There are dozens of ways to fraudulently access someone's accounts, especially if they have inside information about you. She continued down her list. Second, we need to request copies of any documents Marcus and Vanessa had prepared by their attorney. Those trust documents, any powers of attorney, healthcare directives, anything they wanted you to sign. We'll need to see exactly what they were trying to get you to agree to. How do I get copies if they took all the papers with them? You request them directly from the attorney who prepared them. Bradley Finch, you said? Yes. I'll draft a letter on your behalf requesting copies of all documents prepared for you. They're required to provide them. Third, we need to run a comprehensive asset search to make sure we have a complete picture of everything you own and identify any unauthorized changes that may have been made. My head was spinning. This sounds expensive. Patricia set down her pen and looked at me directly. Mrs. Whitmore, I'm going to be frank with you. Yes, this will cost money. My hourly rate is $250. A comprehensive asset review and fraud investigation could run several $1,000s. But if we don't do this, if we don't protect your assets now, you could lose everything. $500,000 in assets versus a few thousand in legal fees. Which would you rather lose? She was right, of course. But the idea of spending thousands of dollars on lawyers felt overwhelming. However, Patricia continued, if we can prove fraud and elder abuse, we may be able to recover damages from Marcus and Vanessa, including attorney fees. And given what you've told me, I think we have a strong case. What happens next? I asked. I'm going to prepare a letter to Bradley Finch's office requesting all documents. I'm going to work with your bank to investigate the fraudulent account changes. And I'm going to recommend that you file a police report for the identity theft and bank fraud. A police report? Against my own son? Yes. I know that's difficult, but it's necessary for several reasons. First, it creates an official record of the fraud. Second, it may be required by your bank for their investigation. Third, it establishes that you're taking this seriously and protects you if Marcus and Vanessa try to claim you authorized these changes. I felt tears starting to sting my eyes. Filing a police report against Marcus felt like crossing a line I couldn't uncross. It meant acknowledging that this wasn't a misunderstanding or a mistake, but a deliberate crime. I need to think about that, I said quietly. Patricia nodded. I understand. But don't think too long. The sooner we act, the better our chances of preventing further damage. Can I also ask, have you told anyone else about this situation? Your daughter, perhaps, or close friends? I shook my head. My daughter Eileen lives in Seattle. We talk maybe once a month. I haven't wanted to worry her. You need to tell her. Today. She should know what's happening, both for her own protection and because you may need her support through this. Okay, I said, though the thought of making that phone call filled me with dread. Patricia stood up and walked to her desk, returning with a business card and a folder. Here's my direct number and email. Call me anytime, day or night, if anything concerns you. I'm also giving you this folder with some informational materials about elder financial abuse and your legal rights. Read through them when you get home. She paused at the door. Mrs. Whitmore, I need to ask you something important. Do Marcus and Vanessa have keys to your house? The question caught me off guard. Yes. I gave Marcus a spare key years ago, in case of emergencies. I need you to change your locks. Today, if possible. Don't tell them you're doing it. Just do it. You think they'd try to get into my house? I think they're desperate. They invested $5,000 in legal documents they expected you to sign. They've been taking money from your account. When they realize you're not going to cooperate, they may escalate. I've seen cases where family members enter homes to search for financial documents, forge additional signatures, or pressure elderly relatives when there are no witnesses. I'm not trying to scare you, but I need you to take this threat seriously. I nodded, feeling numb. My home, the place that had always felt safe, where I'd raised my children and built my life, suddenly felt vulnerable. "One more thing," Patricia said. "Don't communicate with Marcus or Vanessa until we've had a chance to review all the documents and build a complete picture of what's been happening. If they call, don't answer. If they come to your house, don't let them in. If they send emails or texts, don't respond. Any communication you have with them right now could complicate our investigation. They're going to know something's wrong if I suddenly stop talking to them." "Good. Let them wonder. Let them worry. Right now, information is power, and we want you to have all the power." I left Patricia's office feeling like I'd entered a different world, one where my son was a criminal and my home needed to be fortified against my own family. The late afternoon sun was starting to slant through the downtown buildings, casting long shadows across Main Street. People walked past me with shopping bags and coffee cups, living their normal lives, completely unaware that my entire world had just shifted on its axis. I sat in my car for a long moment before starting the engine, trying to process everything. Then my phone rang. Marcus's name appeared on the screen. My finger hovered over the answer button. Part of me wanted to pick up, wanted to give him a chance to explain, wanted to believe there was some misunderstanding that could make all of this go away. But Patricia's words echoed in my head, "Don't communicate with them until we've built a complete picture." I let it go to voicemail. A minute later, a text message appeared, "Mom, we need to talk. Please call me back." Then another, "I know you're upset about this morning. We can explain everything if you'll just listen." Then a third, "Vanessa feels terrible about how things went. Can we come by tonight to clear the air?" I turned off my phone and drove home. The house felt different when I walked in. I found myself looking at it through new eyes, seeing it not as my comfortable refuge but as something valuable that people wanted to take from me. I walked through each room, checking windows and doors, making sure everything was locked. Then I called a locksmith from the Yellow Pages. Yes, I still kept a physical phone book, and was relieved when he said he could come by first thing in the morning to change all my locks. Next, I called my daughter Eileen in Seattle. She answered on the third ring, sounding harried. "Mom? Is everything okay? You never call on weekdays." "Eileen, honey, I need to talk to you about something important. Do you have time?" I heard her tell someone to give her a minute, then a door closing. "Okay, I'm in my office." "What's going on? Are you sick?" "No, I'm not sick. But something's happened with Marcus." I told her everything, the trust documents, the pressure to sign, my meeting with the lawyer, the discovery of the fraudulent bank account access. As I talked, I could hear her breathing getting faster. "That son of a bitch," she finally said, and I'd never heard my daughter use that kind of language before. "Mom, I'm going to kill him." "Eileen, no, seriously. What the hell is wrong with him? How could he do this to you?" "I don't know, honey. That's what I've been trying to figure out." "And Vanessa was in on it?" "It seems that way." There was silence on the other end, and then I heard my daughter crying. "Mom, I'm so sorry. I should have been paying more attention. I should have visited more, called more. If I'd been around, maybe he wouldn't have tried this. This isn't your fault, Eileen. You have your own life in Seattle. You're my mother. You'll always be more important than my job or my apartment or anything else." She took a shaky breath. "Okay. Here's what's going to happen. I'm taking emergency leave from work and driving down this weekend. I'm going to stay with you for at least a week, maybe longer. We're going to go through everything together and make sure you're protected." "You don't have to do that." "Yes, I do. Mom, you raised us by yourself after Dad died. You worked 2 jobs to put us through college. You've spent your whole life taking care of other people. Now it's my turn to take care of you." I felt tears sliding down my cheeks. "Thank you, honey. Have you called the police yet?" "Not yet. The lawyer recommended it, but it's so hard, Eileen. He's my son. He stopped being your son the moment he forged your signature and stole from you. Mom, you have to file a police report. If you don't, he's just going to keep trying. I know. I will. Tomorrow. Do you want me to be there when you do it? I can drive down tonight if you need me. No, you don't need to drive 5 hours in the dark. This weekend is soon enough. Okay. But Mom? Lock your doors tonight. And don't let Marcus in if he shows up. Promise me. I promise. After we hung up, I made myself a simple dinner, soup and toast, though I could barely taste it. I kept thinking about Marcus, trying to remember the last time we'd had a real conversation, the kind where we talked about things that mattered instead of just exchanging pleasantries about the weather and his job. It had been years. Maybe longer than that. Somewhere along the way, my son and I had become strangers who happened to share DNA. That night, I barely slept. Every sound in the house seemed amplified, the creak of the floorboards, the rattle of the windows in their frames, the hum of the refrigerator. I kept expecting to hear Marcus's car in the driveway, kept bracing for a confrontation I didn't know how to handle. At 3 a.m, I got up and went to the window, looking out at the quiet street. Constance's house 3 doors down was dark. The streetlights cast pale circles on the pavement. Everything looked normal, peaceful, safe. But I knew that was an illusion. My son had betrayed me. My daughter-in-law had manipulated me. The family I thought I had was a fiction. And tomorrow, I had to start the process of tearing down that fiction and facing the truth, no matter how much it hurt. I thought about the woman I'd been just 48 hours ago, the woman who'd been content with her quiet life, her Tuesday book club, her Wednesday volunteer shift, her simple routines. That woman had believed her children loved her, that she was safe, that the future was predictable and manageable. That woman was gone. In her place was someone I was just beginning to know, someone who'd learned that trust was a luxury she could no longer afford, that family could be the most dangerous threat of all, and that sometimes the people who were supposed to protect you were the very ones you needed protection from. As the sky began to lighten with the first hints of dawn, I made myself a cup of coffee and sat at my kitchen table, the same table where Marcus and Vanessa had spread out those papers and demanded my signature. I thought about Patricia Reynolds's words, information is power, and we want you to have all the power. It was time to stop being a victim. Time to stop hoping this was all a misunderstanding that could be smoothed over with a conversation. My son had made his choice. Now I had to make mine. And when the sun finally rose on that Thursday morning, I knew exactly what I was going to do. I was going to fight back. Thursday morning arrived with unexpected clarity. I'd barely slept, but exhaustion had given way to something sharper, a focused determination I hadn't felt in years. At 7 o'clock, I was already dressed and sitting at my kitchen table with a fresh cup of coffee, waiting for the locksmith I'd scheduled for 8:30. My phone had been buzzing all night with messages from Marcus and Vanessa. I'd left it on silent, but I could see the notifications piling up on the screen. Mom, please answer. We need to talk. You're being unreasonable about this. Call me back. Vanessa is very upset. You owe us an explanation. Fine. If this is how you want to be, don't expect us to help you anymore. That last message had come at 2 a.m. I wondered if Marcus had been drinking, or if he was simply panicking. Either way, I didn't respond. At 8:15, my doorbell rang. I looked through the peephole and saw a young man in coveralls with Anderson's lock and key embroidered on the pocket. Mrs. Whitmore? I'm Jake Anderson. We spoke yesterday about changing your locks? Yes, come in. It took him less than an hour to change all the exterior locks, front door, back door, and the door leading from the garage into the house. He gave me 3 copies of each new key and took the old locks with him when he left. Just to be safe, he said. Sometimes people keep copies of old keys. This way, there's no chance of anyone having access they shouldn't. After he left, I held the new keys in my hand, feeling their unfamiliar weight. These keys represented a line I'd crossed. Marcus's old key wouldn't work anymore. If he tried to let himself into my house, he'd find himself locked out. Good. At 9 o'clock, I called Patricia Reynolds. Mrs. Whitmore, good morning. I was just about to call you. I sent the letter to Bradley Finch's office first thing this morning requesting copies of all documents prepared for you. We should hear back within 48 hours. Thank you. I changed my locks this morning like you suggested. Excellent. Now, have you given any more thought to filing a police report? I took a deep breath. Yes. I want to do it. Today. I think that's the right decision. Would you like me to accompany you to the police station? Sometimes it helps to have legal representation present when making these kinds of reports. Yes, please. That would be helpful. I can meet you at the Riverside Police Department at 11. Will that work? I'll be there. The Riverside Police Department occupied a square brick building on Oak Street, next to the fire station. I'd driven past it countless times but had never actually been inside. Patricia was waiting for me in the parking lot when I arrived, her silver sedan parked near the entrance. Are you ready? She asked as we walked toward the door together. As ready as I'll ever be. The interior of the police station was institutional and impersonal, fluorescent lights, vinyl floors, plastic chairs bolted to the wall. A young officer sat behind a glass partition at the front desk. We need to file a report for identity theft and bank fraud, Patricia said, handing him her business card. The officer, his nameplate said, Officer Brennan, looked at the card, then at us. Let me get Detective Morrison. She handles financial crimes. Have a seat. We waited about 10 minutes before a woman in her 40s emerged from a back hallway. She wore dark slacks and a blue button-down shirt, with a detective's badge clipped to her belt. I'm Detective Lisa Morrison. You're here to report financial fraud? Yes, Patricia said. This is my client, Dorothy Whitmore. She's discovered that her son has been accessing her bank accounts without authorization and has forged her signature on bank documents. Detective Morrison's expression shifted from routine professionalism to focused attention. Let's go to an interview room where we can talk privately. The interview room was small and sparse, a table, 4 chairs, a recording device mounted on the wall. Detective Morrison sat across from us and pulled out a notepad. Mrs. Whitmore, I'm going to ask you to tell me everything that's happened, starting from the beginning. Take your time and be as detailed as possible. So I told her. Everything. The Wednesday morning ambush, the pressure to sign documents, my refusal, the discovery of the unauthorized account changes, the withdrawals to the Whitmore Family Medical Fund. Patricia occasionally interjected with legal clarification, but mostly she let me tell my story. Detective Morrison took detailed notes, stopping me occasionally to ask specific questions. When had I first noticed the unauthorized withdrawals? Had I ever given Marcus permission to access my accounts? Had there been any other suspicious activity? Mrs. Whitmore, do you have the bank statements showing these unauthorized transactions? I pulled them from my folder and handed them over. She studied them carefully, making notes. And your bank has confirmed that Marcus Whitmore was added to your account without your knowledge or consent? Yes. They said the change was made in April, supposedly in person with both our signatures. But I never went to the bank in April. I never signed anything. Do you know how he might have obtained a document with your signature? I told her about the mail theft in April, about the neighbor's teenage grandson who'd been caught taking mail from mailboxes. Detective Morrison's expression grew more serious. So it's possible Marcus intercepted bank correspondence and used it to forge your signature? That's what I think happened. And there's more. I took a breath. The lawyer who prepared the trust documents were requesting copies of everything they wanted me to sign. But based on what they told me, those documents would have given Marcus and his wife complete control over all my assets. My house, my bank accounts, my investments. Everything. How much are we talking about in total assets? A little over $500,000. Detective Morrison set down her pen. Mrs. Whitmore, what you're describing is a serious case of elder financial exploitation. The bank fraud alone is a felony. If we can prove that Marcus forged your signature and accessed your accounts without authorization, he's looking at criminal charges. The reality of what I was doing hit me like a physical blow. My son could go to jail because of what I was reporting today. I know this is difficult, Detective Morrison said gently. But you're doing the right thing. Elder financial abuse is one of the fastest growing crimes in the country, and most of it goes unreported because victims are afraid to act against family members. What you're doing right now, reporting this, protecting yourself, you're not just helping yourself. You're setting a precedent that this behavior isn't acceptable. She asked me several more questions, then had me sign an official statement. I'm going to open an investigation immediately. I'll coordinate with your bank to get copies of the fraudulent signature cards and transaction records. I'll also need to interview Marcus and Vanessa. What happens then? If the evidence supports criminal charges, we'll present the case to the district attorney. Based on what you've told me, I expect they'll file charges for identity theft, bank fraud, and attempted theft by deception. Those are serious felonies with significant prison time attached. Prison time. My son in prison. The thought made me feel sick. How long does the process take? Patricia asked. Could be several weeks for the investigation, then several more months if charges are filed. White-collar crimes can move slowly through the system. She turned back to me. Mrs. Whitmore, I need to warn you that once Marcus realizes you filed a police report, he may try to contact you. He may apologize, make promises, try to convince you to drop the charges. Don't engage with him. Don't let him into your house. Any communication should go through your attorney. I understand. One more thing. Do you feel safe at home? I thought about my newly changed locks, about Eileen driving down from Seattle this weekend. Yes, I think so. If that changes, if you feel threatened in any way, call 911 immediately. Don't hesitate. As Patricia and I walked back to our cars, I felt drained but also strangely lighter, as if I'd set down a burden I'd been carrying without realizing it. You did well in there, Patricia said. I know that wasn't easy. What happens next? We wait for the documents from Bradley Finch's office. We wait for the police investigation to proceed. And in the meantime, we do a comprehensive review of all your assets to make sure we haven't missed anything. When will we know if charges are filed? Probably not for a few weeks. Detective Morrison will keep us updated on the investigation's progress. I drove home feeling emotionally exhausted. It was only 1 o'clock in the afternoon, but it felt like I'd lived through an entire week since waking up that morning. When I pulled into my driveway, I saw a car parked on the street in front of my house. Marcus's BMW. And there, sitting on my front porch steps, was my son. He stood up as I got out of my car, and I could see he'd been crying. His eyes were red and swollen, his hair disheveled, his expensive suit rumpled like he'd slept in it. Mom, please. We need to talk. I remembered Detective Morrison's warning. Don't engage. Don't let him in. But this was my son. The boy I'd raised. And despite everything, part of me still wanted to believe this could be fixed, that there was some explanation that would make sense of it all. Marcus, you need to leave. Just give me 5 minutes. Please. I can explain everything. There's nothing to explain. You forged my signature. You stole from my bank account. You tried to trick me into signing away my house. His face crumpled. It wasn't like that. Mom, you don't understand what kind of pressure we've been under. We? You and Vanessa. Vanessa's family lost everything in a bad investment 2 years ago. Her father's business collapsed. They have nothing. We've been supporting them, helping with her parents' medical bills, her brother's legal fees. We're drowning in debt, Mom. We owe over $200,000. The confession poured out of him in a rush, words tumbling over each other. I know what we did was wrong. I know we shouldn't have accessed your account without asking. But we were desperate. We kept thinking we'd pay it back before you noticed, that we'd fix everything and you'd never have to know. So the medical fund was paying for Vanessa's mother's cancer treatment. She doesn't have insurance. The treatments cost thousands of dollars a month. I felt a flicker of sympathy despite everything. But then I remembered the trust documents, the pressure to sign, the manipulation. If you needed money, why didn't you just ask me? Because you would have said no. The words came out harsh, angry. Then he seemed to catch himself, softening his tone. Mom, you live like you're poor. You have $500,000 in assets, but you shop at thrift stores and use coupons like you're broke. Meanwhile, our family is falling apart, and you're sitting on all this money you're never going to use. It's my money, Marcus. I worked for it. Gerald worked for it. And what are you going to do with it? Die alone in this house and leave it all to the state? He was getting agitated again, pacing on my porch. We were trying to protect you. The trust was designed to make sure your assets stayed in the family, that you'd be taken care of if you got sick, that there'd be something left for your grandchildren. While giving you and Vanessa complete control over everything. Because someone needs to manage it. You barely understand how bank accounts work. You think the internet is dangerous. You still write checks at the grocery store, for God's sake. You're not capable of managing $500,000 in assets. There it was. The real truth beneath all the justifications. He thought I was incompetent. He thought he was entitled to my money because I was too stupid to manage it properly. I want you to leave, I said quietly. Mom, please, I filed a police report this morning, Marcus. For identity theft and bank fraud. There's going to be an investigation, and probably criminal charges. His face went white. You did what? I protected myself from someone who was stealing from me. Even if that someone is my son. I can't believe you do this to me. His voice rose, angry now. After everything we've done for you, driving you to appointments, helping with your shopping, including you in our lives, this is how you repay us? By trying to send me to prison? I didn't try to send you to prison, Marcus. You did that to yourself the moment you forged my signature. You're going to regret this. He was backing toward his car now, his face twisted with rage and fear. When you're old and sick and alone, when you need someone to take care of you and there's nobody there because you drove your own family away, you're going to wish you'd handled this differently. Maybe I will, I said. But at least I'll still have my house. He got in his car and peeled out, tires squealing on the asphalt. I stood on my porch watching him go, my hands shaking. Inside, I locked the new deadbolt and leaned against the door, feeling tears finally break through. This was real now. There was no going back, no undoing what I'd set in motion. My phone rang. It was Patricia Reynolds. Mrs. Whitmore, I just got a call from Bradley Finch's office. They're refusing to provide copies of the trust documents. What? Can they do that? They're claiming attorney-client privilege, which is absurd since you're the client, not Marcus. But it tells me something important. Those documents contain information they don't want us to see. I'm filing a motion to compel disclosure, but it might take a few days. Marcus was just here. He admitted to taking the money from my account. He said it was for Vanessa's mother's cancer treatment, that they're in debt. Did you engage with him? Only briefly. I told him about the police report. He was angry. Of course he was. Mrs. Whitmore, I need you to be very careful for the next few days. Marcus is going to be desperate now. Desperate people do unpredictable things. Over the next week, the investigation unfolded with methodical precision. Detective Morrison proved to be thorough and relentless. She obtained security footage from Riverside Community Bank showing Marcus entering the bank in April with a woman who wasn't me. She interviewed the bank employee who'd processed the account change, who admitted the signature card had looked a little different, but hadn't thought to question it since Marcus had brought what appeared to be proper identification documents. The signature card itself was damning. When compared to my actual signature on other bank documents, the forgery was obvious. Marcus had tried to mimic my handwriting, but the differences were clear to any expert analysis. The investigation expanded when Detective Morrison discovered that Marcus and Vanessa had attempted similar schemes with Vanessa's elderly aunt in California. No charges had been filed in that case because the aunt had refused to cooperate, but it established a pattern of behavior. Patricia finally obtained the trust documents through a court order, and what we found was even worse than I'd imagined. The trust gave Marcus and Vanessa complete control over all assets, with minimal accountability. There were provisions allowing them to collect management fees of up to 5% of assets annually. That would have been $25,000 a year they could legally take from my estate while I was alive. More disturbing, the trust included language that would have made it nearly impossible for me to revoke or modify it once signed. I would have been locked into an agreement that gave them control of my house, my money, everything, with no way out. If you'd signed this, Patricia explained as we sat in her office reviewing the documents, you would have essentially made yourself financially dependent on Marcus and Vanessa's goodwill. And based on the language here, they could have sold your house without your consent, moved you into a facility of their choosing, and used your assets however they saw fit. Could I have ended up homeless? Technically, no. The trust requires them to provide for your basic needs. But the basic needs can be interpreted pretty broadly. They could have put you in a minimal assisted living facility and claimed they were fulfilling their obligations while using the rest of your assets for themselves. I felt sick thinking about how close I'd come to signing those papers. If I hadn't trusted my gut, if I'd believed their urgency and pressure. There's one more thing, Patricia said, pulling out another document. This is a life insurance policy on you. Did you know Marcus had taken out a life insurance policy with you as the insured and himself as the beneficiary? What? When? Last year. $500,000 in coverage. Given that he'd been systematically accessing your assets, I think he was planning for a scenario where you were no longer around to object to what he was doing. The implications made my blood run cold. Had Marcus been planning to kill me? Or just hoping I'd die naturally sooner rather than later? We've turned this over to Detective Morrison as well, Patricia said. It adds another dimension to the case. Eileen arrived that weekend as promised, driving down from Seattle with enough suitcases to suggest she planned to stay for a while. She took one look at me and immediately wrapped me in a hug. Mom, you look exhausted. I'm okay. Just tired. She stayed for 10 days, during which time she went through every inch of my house, organized all my paperwork, set up a filing system I could actually maintain, and interviewed several home security companies until she found one she trusted to install a monitored alarm system. I know you think this is overkill, she said as the technician installed motion sensors and cameras, but humor me. I need to know you're safe when I go back to Seattle. More importantly, she was there when the district attorney's office called to inform us that they were filing criminal charges against Marcus and Vanessa. Multiple felony counts, identity theft, forgery, bank fraud, attempted theft by deception, and elder financial abuse. The trial probably won't be for several months, the prosecutor explained. We're going to offer them a plea deal first, full restitution, probation, no jail time if they plead guilty. But given the severity and the premeditation involved, I'm not optimistic they'll take it. What happens if they don't take the plea? Eileen asked. Then we go to trial, and if convicted, they're looking at significant prison time. 3 to 5 years minimum. After the call ended, I sat in my kitchen feeling numb. 3 to 5 years. My son could spend years in prison because of decisions I'd made. Mom, don't, Eileen said, reading my expression. Don't you dare feel guilty about this. He made his choices. He committed crimes. You're the victim here. He's still my son. And I'm still your daughter. And I'm telling you that what Marcus did is unforgivable. He tried to steal your home. He tried to take everything you and Dad built together. He exploited your trust and your love. That's not what children do to their parents. 3 months later, the case went to trial. Marcus and Vanessa had refused the plea deal, apparently convinced they could win. Their defense strategy was to paint me as confused and easily manipulated, to suggest that I'd actually authorized the account changes and then forgotten about them, that my age made me an unreliable witness. It didn't work. The evidence was too strong. The forged signatures, the security footage, the pattern of behavior, the trust documents designed to strip me of control over my own assets, it all painted a clear picture of calculated exploitation. The jury deliberated for less than 4 hours before returning guilty verdicts on all counts. At sentencing, the judge was harsh. "This court sees many types of crimes," she said, looking directly at Marcus and Vanessa, "but few are as reprehensible as what you've done. You targeted a vulnerable elderly woman, your own mother, and systematically attempted to steal everything she'd worked for. You exploited her trust, manipulated her love for you, and showed no remorse until you were caught." Marcus got 4 years in state prison. Vanessa got 3. They were also ordered to pay full restitution of the $1,500 they'd taken from my account, plus $30,000 in damages and attorney fees. I sat in the courtroom gallery next to Eileen and Patricia, watching the bailiff lead my son away in handcuffs. He didn't look at me. Vanessa was crying, but whether from remorse or self-pity, I couldn't tell. "How do you feel?" Eileen asked quietly as we left the courthouse. "I don't know," I said honestly. "Relieved, I think. And sad. And angry. All at once. That's normal. Is it normal to still love someone who tried to destroy you?" Eileen squeezed my hand. "I think that's what makes you a better person than him. You still have the capacity to love, even after everything. He lost that somewhere along the way." 6 months after the trial, I was sitting in my garden on a warm summer afternoon, reading a book and listening to the birds. Constance came over with fresh lemonade and cookies, settling into the chair next to mine. "How are you doing, Dorothy?" "Really?" "Better," I said. "Some days are harder than others. But I'm okay." "Have you heard from Marcus at all?" "One letter, about a month ago. He apologized. Said he'd had a lot of time to think about what he'd done, that he understood now how wrong it was. I don't know if I believe him, but I wrote back. I told him I forgave him, but that I needed time before I could have a real relationship with him again." "That was generous of you. Or stupid. I'm not sure which." Constance smiled. "Neither. Just human." Patricia had helped me set up a real estate planning system, a proper will, a healthcare directive, a durable power of attorney with Eileen as my designated agent. Everything was transparent, legal, and designed to protect me while ensuring my assets would go where I wanted them to after I was gone. I'd also started volunteering more at the food bank, joining a senior center book club, taking art classes at the community college. My life, which had felt so small and constrained, had somehow expanded. "You know what I realized?" I said to Constance as we sat in the afternoon sun. "I spent so much of my life taking care of other people, my husband, my children, that I forgot how to take care of myself. Not just financially, but emotionally. I let people treat me badly because I was afraid of being alone. And now I know that being alone is better than being exploited. I'd rather have an honest, solitary life than be surrounded by people who only value me for what I can give them." Constance raised her lemonade glass. "To honest lives." "To honest lives," I echoed. That evening, I sat at my kitchen table with my laptop. Yes, I'd finally learned to use a computer, with Eileen's patient tutoring, and composed an email to Eileen. "Dear Eileen," I wrote, "I wanted you to know how grateful I am for everything you did for me during the trial. You dropped everything, drove down from Seattle multiple times, held my hand through the hardest moments of my life. You showed me what real family looks like. I'm updating my will to reflect how much you mean to me. When I'm gone, the house and everything else will go to you. Not because I'm trying to punish Marcus, but because I want my assets to go to someone who values me as a person, not just as a source of money. I love you, sweetheart. Thank you for being the daughter I needed when I needed her most. Love, Mom." I hit send and closed my laptop, feeling a sense of peace I hadn't experienced in months. My phone buzzed with a text from Patricia, restitution payment received. The full $31,500. Wanted you to know. So Marcus had paid. Or someone had paid on his behalf. Either way, the financial damage had been repaired. But some damage couldn't be repaired with money. The relationship I'd had with my son, or the relationship I'd thought I had, was gone. Maybe someday we'd rebuild something new, something more honest. Maybe we wouldn't. Either way, I was okay. I was 70 years old. I owned my home outright. I had enough money to live comfortably. I had a daughter who loved me. I had friends. I had hobbies. I had a life that was mine, built on my own terms, protected by boundaries I'd finally learned to enforce. And most importantly, I had my dignity back. Looking back now at that Wednesday morning when Vanessa slid those papers across my table and said, "Just sign this and don't ask questions," I'm amazed at how close I came to complying. How close I came to trusting the wrong people and losing everything. But I didn't sign. I asked the lawyer instead. And that simple decision, to trust my instincts, to seek professional advice, to demand transparency before giving away my power, that decision saved my life. Not just my financial life, but my actual life. Because I truly believe that if I'd signed those papers, if I'd given Marcus and Vanessa the control they wanted, I wouldn't have lasted much longer. They would have found ways to isolate me, control me, maybe even hasten my death to access that life insurance policy. Instead, I was here. Alive, independent, and free. I walked to my living room window and looked out at Gerald's roses, still blooming after all these years. Survivors, he'd called them. Just like me. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. Somewhere out there, Marcus was in a prison cell, living with the consequences of his choices. Somewhere else, Vanessa was doing the same. And here I was, in my home, safe and whole. I'd learned some hard lessons. That family doesn't always mean loyalty. That love can be exploited by people who view it as weakness. That sometimes the people who claim to be protecting you are actually the ones you need protection from. But I'd also learned that it's never too late to fight back. That age doesn't mean helplessness. That there are good people in the world, lawyers like Patricia, detectives like Lisa Morrison, daughters like Eileen, who will stand with you when you need them. Most importantly, I'd learned to trust myself. To listen to that quiet voice that says something's wrong. To ask questions instead of blindly complying. To demand respect instead of accepting whatever scraps of affection people choose to give me. I was 70 years old, and I just started living on my own terms. And I had no intention of stopping now. Now, I'm curious about you who listened to my story. What would you do if you were in my place? Have you ever been through something similar? Have you ever had to stand up to family members who were taking advantage of you? Comment below and tell me your experience. And if this story resonated with you, if it helped you see that it's never too late to protect yourself and demand the respect you deserve, please share it. Because somewhere out there, there's another elderly person sitting at their kitchen table, looking at papers they don't understand, being pressured to sign away their security by people who claim to love them. Maybe hearing my story will give them the courage to say no. To ask questions. To protect themselves. Thank you for listening until the end. I'm leaving on the final screen 2 other stories that are channel favorites, and they will definitely surprise you. Remember, trust your instincts. Ask the questions. Protect yourself. You're never too old to fight for what's yours.